The biggest takeaway from the 2023 summer movie season is that the theaters are back. After a long period of over 3 to 4 years post pandemic, where people were even saying that the theaters are finished, the era of streaming has begun, and people will never go back to the theaters in big numbers. Yes, we had Spider-Man Far From Home. Yes, we had Avatar The Way of Water, but they were big tentpole movies, and hence many people dismiss their success as a once in a year event. I never believed that theaters would go away. People love having a shared experience, and the joy of going to the movies is something universal, something that we as species have been doing for centuries. And no matter what happens, it is still, for me at least, the most immersive form of art out there. But let's jump right into the 2023 summer box office results. Let's see how these individual movies performed and why I believe that although the theaters are back, the studio still disappointed big time. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was a big winner at the box office, and it was much needed after the disaster that was Ant-Man 3. It had a budget of around $250 million, which meant that it had to make around $500 to $600 million just to break even. In the end, it managed to make $850 million at the box office, generating a profit of over $250 million at the minimum. And that too just from the theatrical release, not counting the streaming numbers and the merchandise sales. Again, this is a testament to how amazing the movie is and the proof that there is no superhero fatigue, it's just bad movies fatigue. People still love these characters, you just have to find a story worth telling without changing the essence of what the character is. I'm looking at you, Ant-Man. Rocket's story arc is one of the most heartbreaking story arcs I have seen in a superhero movie, and the dance sequence at the end was cinema at its finest. The final production budget of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is reported to be around $300 million, making it the 13th most expensive movie ever made. What were the producers thinking? I don't know. Just to break even, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny had to make around $650 million. It ended up making less than $400 million worldwide, resulting in a huge loss of over $250 million. This is easily one of the biggest flops ever. Disney genuinely believed in the film by premiering it at the Cannes Film Festival an entire month before its release date. I guess they were expecting great reviews. It just gets to show how disconnected some of these studios are from the movie going public. It got rotten reviews from the Cannes Film Festival and it has been labeled at best as an average movie. When you have a budget of over $300 million, you have to be more than just an average movie. This movie had no right to be budgeted so high. Speaking of high budgets, with a production budget of $200 million before sales and advertising, The Flash had to make over $450 million at the global box office just to break even. It was supposed to be a stroll in the park for a movie of this size, this scope. Some projected it to be the biggest movie of the year, but it ended up being the biggest disappointment of the year. The movie made just $275 million, yes, below $300 million worldwide, meaning it lost the studios over $200 million. Now, The Flash is a good movie, but it's just not as good as Guardians, and far from being great or memorable. For a movie that has Batman in it, more than a couple actually, cameos all over the place, this movie was destined to make $1 billion at the box office. I think Ezra Miller and his past played a huge role, but I do think the movie as a whole, even though was good, was just not good enough to build any momentum. To imagine that it did not cross $300 million at the box office, it has to be the biggest shocker of the summer season. Ezra Miller might have deserved that, but not the thousands of people who made the movie. This is one of the movies that did not deserve to get flopped this hard. But like I said, Ezra Miller was a big factor. He was not involved in promoting the movie at all. Imagine a scenario where the main actor playing the title character of possibly the biggest movie of the year is not promoting the movie. Imagine a scenario where Margot Robbie does not promote Barbie. This is exactly what happened with The Flash. Speaking of marketing movies, Barbie has a huge budget of $150 million. It is huge considering that it is not a comic book movie nor a sequel from a popular franchise. WB put a lot of faith in this movie, and while Warner Brothers failed with The Flash miserably, making a Barbie movie was a stroke of genius. Of course, it was much easier to promote Barbie than The Flash, and the results show. Considering this cost, the break-even point for Barbie stands at around $350 to $400 million at the worldwide box office. As we speak, the movie has already crossed $850 million. This movie can end up making 1.3 to $1.5 billion. It could end up making more than Top Gun Maverick. Who saw that coming? But maybe we should have. For one, Barbie is a huge IP. Even as a brown Indian male kid, I saw Barbies lying around my cousin's house all the time. Whoever decided to make a Barbie movie at Warner Brothers deserves a lot of credit and a raise. But we have seen big IPs fail big time at the box office. What made Barbie any different? I have one name, Greta Gerwig. Greta Gerwig has churned out amazing movies for the past decade. From Lady Bird to Little Women, she is easily one of the best directors working today. And while personally I did not like Barbie, I can see the art and craft behind the movie and the freedom that the filmmakers got to make this movie. Make no mistake, this is a cultural phenomenon akin to something like Avatar, Frozen, or Top Gun. I would be shocked if there isn't a Barbie 2 coming. This will be the biggest movie of the year. This will pass Super Mario Bros. And it will end up getting a lot of Oscar nominations as well. Oppenheimer is a dialogue heavy, R rated, 3-hour historic biography. It was never supposed to play out like a summer blockbuster, yet it did. The total budget of Oppenheimer reportedly adds up to $100 million. With that in mind, Oppenheimer had to make around $250 to $300 million at the box office just to break even. As of now, the movie has crossed around $450 million already. It could end up making over $650 million, and no one saw that coming. Yes, the Barbenheimer phenomena helped Oppenheimer, but that does not explain the extraordinary holds the movie has been getting at the second and third weekends. I think the movie is extremely rewatchable since it is a bit hard to follow on its first viewing. It has a lot of characters and nuances. The word of mouth is extremely positive. It is the highest rated movie of the year, both from the critics as well as from the audiences. This is the best movie of the year in my opinion. I have watched it a couple of times and I can't wait to see it a third time. After being a little disappointed with Tenet, I did like it, just did not love it. Oppenheimer could very well be my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. But that video is for another time. This is the closest Chris Nolan has ever been to a Best Director Oscar win, and we will have to wait and see how that pans out. Speaking of more Oscar nominations, Spiderman Across the Spiderverse was made on a budget of $100 million, which is $10 million more than the budget of Into the Spider-Verse. It had to generate a minimum of $200 million in the global box office revenue, which the film has already more than tripled. It will end its run at around $700 million, which is absolutely massive. This movie was perfect in every way. It was a terrific sequel and sets up the final movie so beautifully I can barely wait. It is very much like Empire Strikes Back, although I do think it's even more of a cliffhanger. Again, like Guardians 3, it just showed that the demand is there. Yes, even for superhero movies, you just have to make it great as well as interesting. Miles Morales is easily one of the most interesting protagonists who is faced with the moral and ethical situations in a movie that challenges its characters emotionally. This movie was so deep on so many levels. Across the Spider-Verse achieved what the next movie clearly did not, and that was setting up the next movie for huge success by being one of the biggest movies of the year. I'm expecting it to get a Best Picture nomination, and that is rare for a comic book movie. Now, for most movies, you can point out why it failed. Maybe it wasn't a great movie, maybe there were controversies surrounding it, maybe the marketing wasn't great, or maybe it did not have a recognizable name in the cast. Unfortunately, there is a movie which was great, it had no controversy surrounding it, its marketing was great, it had one of the biggest stars on the planet, and yet it lost a ton of money. Reported as having a budget of over $300 million, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 had to cross at least $650 million just to break even. Currently, the movie is sitting at $450 million. It could get close to $600 million, but that would still mean a loss of over $50 to $100 million. This box office failure of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 seems to be puzzling, but one big reason is pretty apparent. It is the Barbenheimer phenomena. It just got swept aside by the audiences readying themselves for the cultural phenomena where Oppenheimer took away all of the IMAX screens and Barbie took away everything really. This points out to the disastrous decision of putting Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 week before this Barbenheimer storm. Reportedly, IMAX requested the makers to move it to a different release date, but instead, the makers believed in the movie's success even while they were promoting the Barbenheimer phenomena. It's a shame that one of the best movies of the year, having one of the biggest names in the world in Tom Cruise, who has championed the theater industry, who literally brought people back into the theaters just a year back with Top Gun Maverick. Yes, I'm talking about people who are not just the MCU fans. I'm talking about people who are over 40 years old. I'm talking about bringing generations together. Tom Cruise puts his all into everything he does. Coupled with the amazing Christopher McQuarrie, Dead Reckoning Part 1 is a special movie. The critics loved it, the audiences loved it, and the marketing was great. but it could very well be one of the unluckiest movies ever with its release strategy. Yes, the budget was high, but we are, what I believe to be, is close to the end of the franchise. And considering how much Fallout made and how amazing these movies are, a $300 million budget, although a lot, shows in the movie. I also think that the villain, although mysterious, was perhaps a bit too mysterious. I think it will be more fleshed out in part 2, but the box office failure of part 1 is really worrying as it had to set up part 2, and while I and almost everyone think it's awesome, not enough people showed up at the theaters. Among other movies, Fast 10 flopped by making just $700 million against a budget of around $350 million. It needed to make at least $800 million just to break even, meaning it lost the studio over $100 million. With a $250 million budget, Little Mermaid needed again around $600 million just to break even. I expect it to finish right around that $600 million mark. It will turn out to be profitable overall considering the merchandise sales and once it gets to streaming, but make no mistake, this is another disappointing result from Disney. Similarly, Transformers Rise of the Beast managed to just break even by earning $450 million worldwide on a $200 million budget. Again, we are just counting dollars here, but considering the huge amount of flops the summer had and the track record of the Transformers movies being stinkers, I think this is the best the studios could have hoped for. Although it is still a disappointing result, Transformers is a huge IP and these results don't justify that. Among sleeper hits, Sound of Freedom, despite its controversies, will turn out to be a hit by making 10 times its budget. You cannot ignore the success the movie has, even if you have issues with what the movie is trying to say. Clearly, it has struck a pulse with the audiences. And lastly, Pixar has not been having the best of times lately, and Elemental is an example of that. Made at a humongous budget of over $200 million, the movie will close at around $400 million. It is not the biggest of losses, but it will lose the studio above $50 million minimum. Here are the top 10 movies at the summer box office. Barbie completely demolishes the competition here. I predict it to cross $1.4 billion by the time its theatrical window ends, followed by Guardians 3 at $850 million. It does get crowded from the third to seventh spot. Across the Spiderverse is a smash hit at third with $700 million, closely followed by the super expensive Fast 10. Oppenheimer will end up at around $650 million, although that number can still go higher. Then we have a bunch of disappointing movies from 6th to 10th in the Little Mermaid, Mission Impossible, Transformers, Elemental, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And yes, The Flash did not even make the list. Coming to the biggest disappointments and money losers of the summer, there could be three movies that are going to lose more than $100 million, and sadly, Mission Impossible could be one of them. But $100 million isn't enough for a couple of these movies. Here we have two of the biggest box office failures in box office history in Indiana Jones and The Flash. Indiana Jones will beat out The Flash to become the biggest money loser of the summer thanks to its excessive budget. It will lose the studio over $250 million. Yes, $250 million. Not far behind is The Flash, which I think will estimate around $200 million as well. The shame here is that I think while one of these movies stink, The Flash and Mission Impossible are actually pretty good. Mission Impossible is actually great. Again, I think it's unfortunate, but in the case of Mission Impossible, I definitely think a different release date might have done wonders. Nevertheless, I hope people catch up on it so that Dead Reckoning Part 2 can surpass all expectations. And that rounds up my summary of the summer box office season. Thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you like this breakdown. I'm working harder to make these videos better, and I hope that you all get better content each time. I recently made a video thanking all the subscribers. At the time of making the video, I had only 10 subscribers, but since the video has been out, I'm close to around 20, which really means the world to me. So again, a big thank you to all.